Hey guys, today I'm going to walk you through how I rigged this mermaid character. If you want to see how I modeled and textured her, I have a previous video on that I will link in the description. I do want to give a disclaimer that while I am a professional that does indeed work in Blender every day, I've only started learning rigging characters in the past 6 months, so there are a lot of holes in my knowledge, but I was able to rig her pretty simply and without any plugins. So if you're interested in learning how I did that, keep watching. I also want to mention that this is not going to go into how I did the environment, but if you're interested in seeing how I lit and textured that, let me know down in the comments and I'll see if I can make a video about it. Otherwise, let's jump into it. So to start off, I'm going to add an armature into the scene, which is just a single bone, and then I'm going to go to the Object Properties tab, which is the orange square, and go down to Viewport Display and check the in front box. And that just means that your bones are going to be in front of your mesh no matter what, and it just makes it easier to keep track of what you're doing. In edit mode, I'm then going to press E to extrude the tips of the bones upwards. And this is kind of trial and error, but typically I like to have a hip or waist bone and then a lower chest and an upper chest going to the neck and then the head. And then I'm going to move on to her tail, which I'm going to flip the direction of just so that it's flexing the correct direction. Flipping it breaks the chain of the rig so that her tail is not going to influence her upper body. As far as how many bones to give her rig, that was trial and error. Originally I gave her 5, and when I flexed it, it was really chunky looking. So I just subdivided that more. And a quick tip is just drag one bone from the top to the bottom of the area you're trying to add a bunch of bones to, and then you can subdivide it so that you can quickly get a lot of connected bones that are going in a straight line, and you don't have to individually extrude them. Throughout this video, I'm going to be checking if my bones are connected to each other and parented correctly. For whatever reason, I was having issues where that little dotted line was coming out from a joint that I didn't like. For example, on the shoulder, I wanted the dotted line to come up from the tip, one tip higher. So I had to disconnect it and then reconnect it. And I think I was just messing something up. But again, not a huge deal. You can manually fix it. And then you're just going to disconnect them by pressing Alt-P and doing Control-P to reconnect them. So this is the tip I wanted the connection to come out of. I'm not sure if it really makes a huge deal, but I feel like that just makes more sense anatomically. So for the arm, you just need 2 bones, one for the upper and one for the lower. And then on my original animation, I actually didn't rig her hand except for her palm, but I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to do that. So I'm going to extrude her lower arm bone to get one for the main palm. And then from there, I'm going to have 2 bones per finger. And again, I didn't like where the connection was coming out of. I wanted it to come out of the very last tip of the bone, so I had to disconnect them and reconnect them, and then I accidentally disconnected the top finger bone from the lower one, so I had to fix that. After that, I started just duplicating them for each finger, so it's pretty fast, and the main goal is just to make sure that they're in the middle from the top and from looking at them straight on. And another note that I did not get a video of is that for the elbows, and if you had knees, you would want to give the bones a slight flex in that direction. So that just means pushing the tip of the elbow backwards a little bit so Blender knows how to bend it in the right direction. So once you have the entire set of bones for the center and one side, you're going to start naming your bones. And I'm just pressing F2 and then typing the name. Naming does become more important if you're going to take this into Unity or some other program, but for my purposes keeping this in Blender, I just need to make sure that any bones that are on the left side of her body have an L somewhere in the name, so that when I duplicate and symmetrize the bones, Blender will know to make a right version of everything, if that makes sense. Here's what my final naming structure looked like. This doesn't need to be copied exactly for whatever character you're making. Rigging does require some critical thinking skills, but here's the logic of how everything should flow. So once you have all your bones named, you're going to select the ones that are specific to a side and select Symmetrize. And then you're going to parent your mesh to your rig. So you're going to select your mesh first and then your rig and press Ctrl P to parent it. And I used automatic weights because Blender has done a pretty good job with these simple models just to get the weight painting correct from the start. So I like to do a quick check just to see how it painted it by bringing the rig into pose mode, which you can do with Control Tab after selecting the rig. So you can test things by rotating them in various directions. And if anything's wonky, you're going to have to manually weight paint your model. And I'm just going to show you a quick example of how to manually adjust your weight painting. I'm not going to get super in-depth because I think you could dedicate a whole video to weight painting, and I have a pretty surface level understanding of it. So to view how your rig is weight painted, you're going to select the rig and then your mesh, and then you're going to go into the weight paint menu. And then I like to press Shift Spacebar to select the cursor, and then you can just shift click any of your bones and see how much influence each bone has. So basically the colored area is how much influence that bone has on the mesh, and it goes from a scale of 0 to 1. 1 is red, which is complete influence, and then blue is 0. Like I said, this mesh did not need any adjustment for the weight painting, but for example, if I was going to have a lot of flexion around the torso and I wanted to make sure that it only moved her stomach and not the fins of her tail, I would try and get rid of all of the color on the tail and keep it all to her torso, if that makes sense. So right here I'm using the gradient tool, and that's good just to cover areas completely so you're not missing anything because it will cut through the entire mesh. Another way is to go into the face select mode and then just to select the torso, and then it won't paint anything outside of what you have selected. So that's a general guideline on how you adjust weight paint. Again, not going to get super into it, but I hope this was helpful. So I know some of you are wondering, hey, the top in her hair does not move with the rig, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the simplest way. I think there are a few ways to do this, but for what I needed to animate, this just worked best for me. So I'm going to select the top and add a child of constraint, and I'm going to choose the armature that we rigged and choose the closest bone to the object, and you'll see that I'll kind of make it go out of place. You just want to make sure you click set inverse, and then it is parented. And it's not a perfect method. As you can see, it's intersecting on her back. I did have to add a solidify modifier to make it a little bit thicker so that if it did intersect you couldn't tell. This is just the simplest way to get something done quickly. You can also parent that to the armature like you did the body, and you'll have to weight paint it, but that's a huge pain sometimes. So this is just what works best for me, but that is another way to do it. I'm going to do the same thing with the scalp, and you can see it's messing its location, so you just make sure to press set inverse and then it's connected. So now I get to show you the only fun part of rigging, which was putting bone constraints on the tail so it will procedurally animate for you like a fish. So you're going to bring your rig into pose mode, and starting from the tips of the fin, you're going to select the first two, press Shift Control C, and select damped track. And that is going to put a bone constraint on your rig, and you're going to want to lower the influence as you get closer to the top of the tail. Basically, the higher the number, the more flexible and reactive the bone is going to be, so you want it to be less flexible towards the top of the tail and more flexible at the fins. And it's just trial and error as far as what number you should put in the influence, and it's fun to play with, so just play around with the numbers. And you're just going to repeat that every new pair of bones all the way until you get to the last part of the tail. And here's what my tail ended up looking like. Super fun, and it just reacts to the movement of the torso, so that saves a ton of time. And I think you could find a lot of use cases for the bone constraints, but this is the only one that I've tried so far. So that's the tail, and now we're going to move on to how I rigged the hair. Originally, I didn't think it was necessary to do the hair, and I could have just used shape layers, but it really wasn't giving the effect of floating in water, and it needed more animation throughout the lock of hair. So I ended up creating a separate rig, and then constraining that rig with a child of constraint to the rig of the body. So I did initially start adding the rig for the hair to our original armature, but I didn't want to risk the calculation of the automatic weights messing up the body, so I decided to separate those bones by pressing P in edit mode and setting them to a different selection, which automatically created a new armature for me. And you're going to do the same process where you line up your joints in the center as much as you can. It's a little bit difficult because the hair is wavy and going in weird directions, but once it's mostly in the center, you're going to select your mesh and then parent it to your bones. And honestly, it worked perfectly fine for my purposes. Not trying to get the most detailed wavy locks. And then I just repeated it for each lock of hair that needed to move. And then again, I just parented that armature to the original body armature by doing a child of constraint, and yeah, then it moves with the rig. You just want to make sure that your hair pieces are not parented to anything. So make sure that they don't have their own constraints, and make sure you break any parenting you might have to any nulls or anything like that. Otherwise, that position is going to get added on top of any change in position of the rig, if that makes sense. And that's what I was struggling with here, where the hair was moving more than the rig was moving. It's because I had a child of constraint on the hair geometry and the hair rig, so I needed to delete that off of the hair piece, and it took me a while to figure that out, so just watch out for that. Alright, that about wraps it up for your mermaid rig, so I hope this was helpful, and I'm happy to clarify anything in the comments. It'd be awesome if you guys would let me know what you'd like to see next, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!